welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. This is, I think, my 108th video since I started keeping count. And today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've been playing around with the different tonalism palettes, trying to just develop those. And last night I had done one with the sap green, Venetian red, mixing those two together. That's my kind of common go-to one. That one, when you mix it, you get browns, you get greens and whatnot, and reds. And then I started adding phthalo blue, ultramarine, and Payne's gray, which kind of helped me push it in different directions. Now, today, I'd like to utilize that and then play with just adding some different colors to it and seeing how we can expand upon it. So I have an 11 by 15 sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. I just saturated it with the medium Hake brush. And while the paper absorbs, I'll talk more about the palette. So I'm going to clean this guy off. I started talking about the basics of this one, the Venetian red and the sap green. And the reason I think, I don't know if I said why I started adding the different colors to it, the blues and the Payne's gray, because this one has quite a tonal shift when it dries. So if you watch my videos, you'll hear me talk about tonal shifts quite a bit, meaning that as it dries, it gets lighter. So that's something you have to watch out for with watercolor. Even if you put in pure black, when it dries, it lightens up. So, but I did find with that other combination, the phthalo green and the quinacridone rose, that one I get the grays with, I didn't have as much as a tonal shift with the drying, which was pretty cool. But we're going to save experimenting with that one for another day or another video. So I play with the phthalo blue and the ultramarine, kind of push it back and forth. I believe the ultramarine is kind of a cooler color, while the phthalo blue makes everything kind of pop forward a little bit more. And that just helps me just get some darks and whatnot, as well as the Payne's gray. And Payne's gray is a blue with a black mixed into it, pigment-wise. A few videos back in the comment section, a viewer had posted, I think they had a few different Payne's grays in front of them, and they were able to post the pigment concentration content from them. I use mainly Da Vinci brand watercolors. From this mix, the only thing that's not Da Vinci is the phthalo blue. That is a Van Gogh brand. I had poured a whole bunch on the palette because the tube broke, so I just put it there. And phthalo blue a little bit goes a long way. Goes a really long way. So anyway, I like to wet the palette in this fashion. So I'm thinking I'm going to approach it the way I normally do, put in the image, the scenery and whatnot, and then play around with what colors. We might play around with raw sienna. I'm not quite sure. Lemon yellow will most likely be a big part in this one. I found that sorry that I'm umming so much as I'm talking. I'm just kind of thinking through stuff. I found that lemon yellow doesn't go to a weird green with this palette. It kind of just works. I think at the end it helps change things up. One idea that I did have was wiping back an area and leaving it mostly clean and clear until the end, and then putting lemon yellow in that. So that might be something that takes place as well. I have the Naples yellow to kind of experiment with. It's Naples yellow red, which I think is I used it once or twice. Where's the other ones? We also have the quinacridone gold, quin gold. That's something that I've been playing around with, where it just it's not too like opaque, but it's very bright, very colorful, very interesting. And I think that would really work in a sky in the Tonalism palette. And what else do we want to experiment with potentially? I was thinking about cerulean blue, and then as well as maybe Titan, Buff Titan, if I could find it. That's that paint that whenever I look for it, I have a hard time finding it. And once I find it, it's whenever I don't need it. So it'll pop up. So a lot of different potential explorations in this painting. And like I said, I'm not quite sure where we're going to go with this whole thing. But we're going to do a normal approach first, and then start playing around. Okay, so the water is nice and page is nice and soaked. Flatten it out. And composition-wise, I don't have anything in mind, but I may have to go to a composition that I have done before. Mainly just to get that initial out the way so we can start experimenting with different colors and whatnot. And I think the best way to describe what's going on in my mind is that it might be akin to oil painting, where oil painting, they would take a burnt umber or, you know, brown, neutral, something like that, and they would put in a you know, just like a underpainting, and I think the term is grisalia. So they put in an underpainting, let it dry, and then the next day or so they would start glazing over it. So I've been using that color and that tonal approach as if it was a final painting. And I think you're putting these in and then putting in colors afterwards would almost be like the oil painting master's approach, where you have that underpainting, the tonal shapes, and then putting colors on top of that. But since we're using transparent watercolors, I think traditionally, and unfortunately I'm not a traditionalist with watercolor, I follow kind of like a fast and loose Ron Ranson technique that I've started mixing with the tonalist oil painters. I think traditionally you would just leave those colors blank or the spots blank and then put those colors in. So here I'm going to be almost, I guess, glazing over tonal values. So we'll see. I don't know if any of that made any sense. It might just be more rambling, but we're just, best takeaway is we're experimenting. So I block in just shapes. This is, I always do the shout out to him. This is from Stuart Davies or Dennis Sheehan, the oil painters, where they'll just kind of go willy-nilly and then let shapes start forming from it. In fact, they get even more extreme with their pushing. I remember one video, Mr. Davies had said that somebody had left a comment saying that it was just too overboard and dramatic, the strokes that he was putting in initially. But no, that's the way he paints. That's the way he's just letting loose and creating the scene. And he will film and then talk over his videos, so he is often listening to music while he's doing it. And he says he gets into the music quite a bit. So we have a basic structure here. It might move around, it might be played around with, but I think you can see shapes forming. We have our paper towels, which I'll utilize to lift and smear and soften. Unfortunately, Dennis Sheehan, he has some he has pictures online. He's been very active on Facebook lately with posting his daily oil sketches, and he does have this thing on, I think it's Vimeo, Vimeo, like a video service of some painting tutorials. And I think he does have some short videos on YouTube for free. But he has the Vimeo, they call it the Sheehan Academy. And I think that's something that one day I would like to sign up and pay for. And check out his videos and his oils and see what tutorials he has to offer. So those two I always give shout outs to, especially with this style. You might let this have another mass of trees or bushes up front and then bring that shadow down. So I mentioned fast and loose. I am, I guess, at heart a student of Ron Ranson, using the Hake brush, and my palette, my other palette on the ancillary colors that are on it right now that we're not utilizing are the Ron Ranson palette and what I usually paint with. This is just my deviation into tonalism, which is my favorite school of painting. Tonalism, well, favorite school for me to paint in. I like the movement right before it, which was the Hudson River Valley painting, the American landscape painters of the 1800s, which then grew into tonalism and other stuff. All right, so we have fresh paper towel. I find that if you get large concentrations of water in some areas, and for some reason typically, despite stretching and moving with these clips, I'll get some water to sit here, so I often pull that out a little bit. You want to watch out for repeated textures with paper towel. It's very easy to repeat your shapes. And it's an additive and subtractive process where we put in pigment, we lift it up and soften it. Another oil painter that uses, so this is watercolor, but another oil painter that uses this technique is David Usher. All these people that I'm mentioning, I want to make a list and have a list of names so that you guys can see the spelling and you can search them out. David Usher is very prolific on Facebook and YouTube as well. He has oils, acrylic videos, and watercolor. Yeah, oils, acrylic, watercolor. He also has some really nice knife paintings, like paintings with the palette knife. I don't think I've watched one of those videos yet of his, but he has very nice things. And I think he was the one, him and Stephen Cronin were the ones that turned me on to Ron Ranson, helped me discover that. And here is going to be a reflection in the water. This will be a landmass, this will be a reflection. So with the paper towel, you can lift in a lot of different fashions. You can create thin lines and push up and create tree trunks and whatnot. This works very well with oil on a smooth board. It works decently with a watercolor. Another thing you can do is take a wet rigger and utilize the fact that you can start getting some potential dispersion and movement around it. And the dreaded cauliflowers that people get in watercolor can be used to our advantage here. Cauliflowers occur when there's usually too much water being added to a wet area, too little pigment, and too much water being added to an area. So usually when we go wet and wet, as we progress, we'll increase the concentration of pigment and try to lower the concentration of water. But we can use this essentially dispersion to our advantage by pushing these around. Whether they show through in the final image or not, I'm not sure if that'll be for this one, but it helps us create the illusion of just depth, that something's happening, we're making up a scene, we're building it up. I watched a short video by Dennis Sheehan, oil painter, and he mixes his paints so it's like super drippy, the oil paints. And I've watched him put an image in and then wipe the whole thing, put another image in, and he was just within like, was it like 3 minutes, there was like 2 paintings completed on one board. It was just phenomenal, his ability to put these ideas in and create these illusions. One thing that I also try to point out, because this is a lot of just focusing on wet and wet, is that as we use the paper towel here, we're pulling moisture out of the paper in those spots. So as you progress, you'll start having areas of clarity while you'll still have areas of wet and wet with dispersion, which adds to texture. You could always add water back in with the Hake brush. You could also spray with the spray bottle if need be. There's a lot of different things that you can utilize for that. Now, if you want, at this stage, you could also play with the rigger in regards to color addition, pigment addition. And like I said, it's just a lot of back and forth, creating layers, creating depth, and whatnot. And at the end of the day, it's just creating lights and darks, which is kind of the basis of all art, tonal values. And then it's working with texture, which I think is very important as well. But anything that I say is not law or anything like that. It's just my opinion. Okay, so we're not doing any sort of drying off or anything like that. I'm going to now mix in some ultramarine. And this gives me a different green, a different dark. It's more on the cooler side, so it is darker and probably going to make it pop at first, but as we work our way towards the foreground, we'll push it back. Oh, now's a good time for me to give my spiel. If you're interested, I do have a Patreon account if you would like to consider supporting me with buying art supplies and whatnot. There's two very simple, cheap tiers, a $3 and a $5. And the $5 one just gives you access to some exclusive material and whatnot. And like I said, just to help support the arts and purchasing more paint, papers, etc. Gets a little expensive with oil painting, especially. Watercolor, I just go through a lot of paper. A lot of paper. And there's always different pigment combinations to try out and whatnot. Oh, as well as if you ever want to follow along with these, feel free. Feel free to follow along and whatnot. I would love to see y'all's results. Sometimes I do get to a point where I kind of stop talking and explain what I'm doing. And if you ever have any questions about what's going on, feel free to make comments below and ask questions, and I try to get back to things in a timely manner. Sometimes I don't get the notifications that somebody left a comment, so I gotta figure out the best way to set that up. So that was the addition of ultramarine blue. Now I'm going to show you, well, let's get a little bit more on this side, build up these darks back here. And then I'll mix in the phthalo blue for y'all. Ultramarine blue can also be mixed with just Venetian red for a background purple. Maybe we might do that in that background as we play around. I'm going to spray a little bit of water, the light coat, just to kind of get some stuff here. Get some dispersion taking place. Now spraying wet and wet does that same cauliflower type effect as we had with the wet rigger. And people will utilize that as a textural effect within watercolor. Let me show you. We'll clean it. Here's ultramarine with a little Venetian red. if I go back in here, that's kind of that purplish that I was talking about. So that's another color that you can pull out with this palette for far background stuff. In fact, okay, so that was just to give you a little demo color option. Now, where was I? Okay, so I was going to show you phthalo blue in this one. Phthalo blue, very strong pigment. I think that helps it pop a little bit more. I am mixing it into the mixture that I have already there. So hopefully some difference is showing up for y'all. I film using my phone, and I live stream it onto a website called Twitch, and then that allows me to download it from there. So that's the phthalo blue into this mixture. And then, in addition, I've mentioned that we use, well, I've used a Payne's Gray, so we'll grab some of that. And then usually so far with the development of this palette, it would just be a back and forth, creating textures, creating shapes, depth of field with those colors. This is Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray, I'm always fond of it along water edges, even in my just basic palette. See if we can get even darker. This is a very kind of rounded shape, so I'll need some variety stuff coming off of it. Kind of just break up that that line. So we do have a recession, and it brings us to a point of interest, which I somehow put right in the middle of the paper. Well, yeah, but we want to break up perfect lines with trees and water edges. Actually, here's a good example of scraping. We have so much pigment down here that it should scrape pretty easily. And that always adds some interest. I always like to give a little hint of the white reflection. So that's a way to get white without using white paint. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And it adds a little contrast right there. I'm going to darken on this side to kind of get the idea that maybe the light's coming across. But we'll see. I'm not sure where our light's going to take place. One thing I remember somebody saying on the Tonalist Facebook page, because we often try to define tonalism, and there's a lot of different ideas for it. There's a lot of different opinions on the matter. You know, whether it's a real scene, whether it's the motion, whether it's an overall consistency with color, whether it's palettes consisting of browns and greens and purples. Whether it's still only of certain times of day, sunset, things like that. Whether or not figures are involved in the painting, or minimally having just one figure in there, so it seems as if they're in contemplative measure. There's a lot of different things about it. One thing that I remember somebody saying is that we often have it backlit lighting from the back here. So we have the silhouette, but the tree trunks themselves often seem to be highlighted. I think that was what one person was saying, was their view of it. So I'm just trying to make this scene interesting, texture-wise, darks and whatnot, and then we'll move over to playing around with different colors in it and seeing how that works. I just want to make it as if it was a viable painting standing on its own. And then play with it from there. You'll have to excuse me. I woke up early and had a hard time falling back asleep. I did eventually fall back asleep though. Okay. So this is, I would do a little bit more tickling with it and pushing things around, but I think it's a viable scene. I think it's pretty interesting. If we were to dry it, we would have a dry shift taking place. Now we're going to start experimenting with different color combinations in it. First and foremost, here is the mixture of the Venetian red and the ultramarine. This gives us that background purple. So we can create a little bit back here. You can kind of do this with any light tone in any painting. Create that little image in the back. Okay. Next, we have lemon yellow. So let's get a little lemon yellow in this mix. Let's see how it's looking on top of it. This is one that I have played with before. We haven't done a dry off or anything like that yet. This is lemon yellow mixed with Payne's gray that's already on the brush. So let me rinse that off. Let me compositionally scrape a rock in this area too. So grouping the rocks. Let them sit in place. Okay, so now that the brush is more clean, lemon yellow, and if I put it over, we'll see if it spruces it up some. And gives it a little bit more life. feel like with this one it's very subtle, and that was something I was talking about earlier, is that it doesn't give that too off of a green effect with this one. So I need to darken that, so I'm going to come back in. That's the Payne's Gray. So there's a little bit of yellow. Let's see what else we can do. I did talk about the quinacridone gold. Quinacridone gold. I have that already out on another palette. This little tray right here. I'm going to, let's see. It turns green very easily for me. I probably could have used this Quin Gold instead of the lemon yellow on the trees. Let's extend this back here. Okay. Let's work our way up, and I'll come back to that Quin Gold in a bit, most likely. Here, I have cerulean blue already on this palette. I just got to wet it. This is the cerulean blue. I'm going to paint right on top. I probably should have dried off because that's where we get like a cauliflower that we did not want. I'm going to have to come back in and fix that up. Let's continue. Put a little bit of cerulean down in here. Now, we can, with the Payne's Gray, make a darkened overhead. But then we'll have to see how the overall feel blends and whatnot, how it dries. Let's see. I do have this Naples yellow. Put a little drop of that on the palette. Naples yellow red. That was the only Naples yellow that I think that brand had. Where did I put it? Yeah, Van Gogh brand. I think that was the only one it had. It's more of a flesh pinkish tone. It may not work with this one. We may have to come in with the Venetian red itself into the sky. In fact, why don't we grab a little bit of Venetian red. Okay, let's do a dry off. We'll take a look at the overall image and see how it's being affected so far. So let's talk about this for a moment. It seems like it's mostly dry. So like I said, I started off with the sap green and the Venetian red to get these structures, to create the shape of everything. Then I added in ultramarine blue and phthalo blue and Payne's gray in order to get more depth and darks with this, and a little bit of variation on greens and whatnot. And that is also because of the drying shift that takes place, because it didn't dry too light in this, but if it was just those two initial red and green, it's too light for me with the wet and wet. Then, while it was still essentially wet, but these areas were pretty dry, so we didn't do a dry off at that point. But we played around a little bit more back here with Venetian red and ultramarine just to show that purple that could take place. We put lemon yellow on top of a little bit of these spots. Doesn't have much of an effect, but I think it is a subtle, viable thing to give a little just shift with it. Quinacridone gold. Up in here, down in here, and I brought it through the trees. That kind of gives an atmospheric effect. You'll see, who was it? Cezanne, I think. Cezanne's landscapes. You'll see the color of the skies within the trees, and there'll be like a weird overlap effect. So you'd want to look at Cezanne for examples of that if that's something that you're interested in. I put a little bit of the Naples yellow red from Van Gogh brand, but it's kind of flesh toned. It's just a little interest. It was just a little splash in there. This, I believe, was the Venetian red, because we played around with that, and then I brought that down. We were a little dirty here. I think that's because we had cerulean blue, and then we had went to the Payne's gray. So we got a gradient in the sky. I just got to study skies a little bit more color-wise with the sunset, because I feel that the sky should have been more Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, blue, or Roy G. green, blue, indigo, and violet, and that it mimics the rainbow effect with the sky. So I have to just study that a little bit more and incorporate that. The quinacridone gold did not get that super glowing that I talk about. That might have been due to the quality of the water that I was mixing with it, and like I said, it turns very quickly for me, quin gold. I could go back over it and layer over it, but I think that's something that I should not do with this one. I do like the cerulean blue coming up. This white down here of the water, we don't really have much white in the sky, so I feel like we should almost bring that down, but it does add an interesting effect, and it does help this stand and create that plane. So I might leave that there, and I'll post online in art groups and ask them what they think about that. This, I'm glad that I carried over on top of these trees. You can see the brush strokes. We used the hake for that. So I probably just could have mixed a little bit wetter and whatever, but we were going wet and wet, and we were starting to have issues on that curve. But this softness of the edges, almost, it's incidental, but it gives that atmospheric effect. We could darken up here more as well. I think we're going to leave this one the way it is. We could put a little bird in the sky or something like that if we wanted to. All you just need is a little bit of Payne's gray or something like that. And then put a bird. And you could also play around with somebody fishing. You could put little egrets and different guys down in here. But I'm going to leave that be. I'm just going for this. It was a really good experiment. I think we were quite successful in it. We didn't utilize raw sienna. Essentially, I think the lemon yellow, raw sienna, quinacridone gold, we could have almost used those interchangeably for this one. So that's that concept right there. Cerulean blue. I think we could have potentially put some ultramarine in the sky, but I think it would have overpowered and popped too much forward. And Naples yellow, it did add a little variation, but I'm not sure. We'll play around down the line. And buff Titan, which I didn't pull out, or white gouache, we could have done a kind of light wash back here over that, and that would have given a fog effect in the distance. But I am very pleased with this one. Let's put this on top. I'll sign it, and then I'll grab the count. I'll pull the view down for you all to see. Let me sign it. Now, I didn't really do that glazing effect that I was talking about, where we had the browns and then went over it. We just had a little bit take place. We had a little bit with the yellows, but I think this scene just didn't require it. So I think that was a really fun one. It almost has a Turner-esque type sky. So I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll come back with it. Also, I'm live streaming, and I have somebody who just said, SW KitKat said it looks really beautiful. Thank you. I really appreciate that comment. I'm going to get this uploaded onto my YouTube page, Andrew Broussard Watercolors. And I have like a whole bunch of just video after video on there if you want to check, I guess, my back catalog of videos. I had it written on a piece of paper, but do I have it written on here? Yeah, I do. If you ever want to check it out, that's how you spell my name, Andrew Broussard, Watercolors on YouTube. And I'll probably be back later on today with more painting or sketching. All right, everybody, have a great day.